I uh, I wanted to ask each of you bring such profound expertise to this issue. And I wanted to ask each of you a question that I hope will give you some room to share that expertise with those of us who are listening. And then I'll give the other two of you a little bit of room to respond before we move on to the next question. And Vaishnavi, given your really deep experience in this field, I thought it would be great to start with you to build some context. So, we've spent years building guardrails around how young people use social platforms, but 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 AI systems are shaping how they think, learn, and relate. From your work with developers, how do you think they can translate what we've learned about youth safety from social media into the way we train, tune, and deploy AI models?
Well, I think it's a great question, and thank you for having me be a part of this, David. When we've talked about AI systems in recent discourse, whether it's in the public or even internally at a lot of our teams, we've continued to use a lot of the models and frameworks that informed how we built social media tools. And I think in some ways that's been really helpful. And in other ways, it can sometimes miss the more unique nature and elements of AI-assisted conversations, interactions, or projects. So we've worked both with social platforms, of course. We worked with social gaming marketplaces, but now even AI companies who are all trying to figure out answers to the same question with youth safety, which is how do you make it part of how your system learns and evolves, not just how it looks. And so when we talked about some of some of the historic guardrails that we built in social media, things that I worked on in my career, that my team has worked on in their careers, and that we now do even, on an ongoing basis, we've talked about things like how can we make sure that our ranking is more attuned to the developmental needs of young people? How can we introduce friction or nudges into potentially problematic moments of engagement, whether that's looking at something that might be sensitive or sharing a comment that might be potentially harmful? What kind of privacy defaults can we design? And all those lessons from social media, I think, still hold true in an AI context, but they need to live deeper within the tech stack. So a couple of them that have been really interesting, the first one has been we learned this in social media a long time ago. We can't really rely on reactive reports and content review. It's too slow, it's too blunt of a tool. And so in AI systems, that's meant baking a lot of this into proactive training and evaluation. So historically, when we looked at AI data sets that were training these models, they weren't necessarily disaggregated by age or by gender. We're seeing now more youth-specific red teaming data sets that are being built so that we can surface more youth-specific risks, like what does grooming look like amongst teenagers or young children? What does self-harming language look like in those communities? We're also integrating some of those signals around safety preferences into the human feedback loop, into the continuous testing pipelines. And then we're also running more simulation tests that are probing some of those boundaries ahead of time. So we're really moving safety into that initial training part of the loop rather than, at the end as sort of a patchwork. And then the final thing I think that we can learn from social media, but also kind of adapt into an AI context, is it's really important that we have transparency in this process so that we can better identify when things have gone wrong. But that transparency looks a little different. It's not a transparency report that's coming out, every twice a year, once a year, maybe a little bit more. It comes from much more robust model scorecards, the evaluations that are ongoing, published on an ongoing basis, potentially even looking at evaluations across different age groups, and then making certain logs more available for audit in a way that is legally and user legally safe and in a user protective way. So I could go on for a long time, but these are some of the initial learnings that we're taking away.
Thank you so much. And Ariel and Ali, I'm curious if either of you have response to that or additional thoughts on what we can learn from the experience of social media.
Yeah, I completely agree with Vaishnavi. I think there's a lot of discussion around with the evolution of social media to AI companions related to going from the affection economy to intimacy economy. And I think we see this in the traits of AI models and how they're more conversational, and the traits related more to how humans behave with anthropomorphism, like they can exhibit personalities, they can talk back to you, relate to you, etc. And so it does push the safety mechanisms deeper into the tech stack. And I agree that using that we need to use the fundamentals of building LLMs to also cover safety. And this has been a very empirical research where we're learning as we're going, and and it's been very collaborative with expanding. I think in the past, tech hasn't normally gone to like clinicians and therapists, but now we're seeing a lot of needs with going to deep experts for information about like how to properly address these safety needs.
I love that. Plus one to all of the above. And I'd also name I think we're seeing some promising things coming out of OpenAI's recent publication of their prevalence rates, right? We're starting to, wow, they're actually showing us behind the hood what are some of these objectionable content rates that they're detecting. I think other big LLMs should follow suit. Any of the big AI companion sites should also be transparent in that. And I think we also should be seeing not only how our model detected rates, but they should also be triangulating that with user reports, because all of these measures are imperfect in their own ways, but we need that triangulation to really get a more accurate measure of what's going on. And I think we're owed that transparency. I think we also need to understand what exactly are they measuring? What is that prevalence rate actually measuring? How are they operationalizing this? What is that label exactly measuring? So I think that would be the things that I would add on here, just that we need to understand exactly what is it that they're saying they're measuring.
Yeah, and I think that this transparency, and Vaishnavi, building on some of the points you made, there is so much that we can learn about how to do effective transparency reporting, about how to standardize what some of these measures are, from the discussions we've had with social media platforms over the past decade. And Ariel, I wanted to turn it to you quickly. So we talked some about transparency, and we've touched a little bit on what are some of these specific interventions? What are some of the levers that can get pulled in the life cycle of an AI product that can help to improve youth safety outcomes? And I know that this is very close to the work you do. I'd love your thoughts on what are some of those specific interventions. I know red teaming is one that's especially effective and accessible. One that I think some of the technical folks on this call might be familiar with, but some of the people who have more of an advocacy background it may be helpful to break down exactly what that means. Can you share a bit about what red teaming is, how it might be used effectively, and some other methods that might complement it to improve youth safety?
Yeah. So red teaming is when you're intentionally testing an AI system for weaknesses. So unlike quality assurance, where you may test to confirm that's working, with red teaming, you're trying to see where the flaws are. And typically, red teamers create test prompts or scenarios for around specific areas. It can range from like child sexual exploitation, abuse, or self-harm, or even to something like medical misinformation. So it really, really depends. But yeah, I think red teaming can be pretty effective collaboratively. I think with AI, we're dealing with natural language. So especially with general purpose models, where how do you think about comprehensive testing for all the ways to discuss every topic, even across languages and cultural contexts. So they could be, so anyone could do red team, like individuals to large teams. And I think how they tend to be operationalized is they identify the priorities of risk for a given AI model. And from red teamings, identifying the high priority risks, they can be brought into the evaluation pipeline. So through red teaming, you can identify like what test prompts do we want to run as we do system updates, and want to prevent safety drifts, for example. So as we see evolution with models like from GPT-4 to 5, they want to make sure there aren't huge sways in safety. And I think the evaluation pipeline is ever evolving. And in terms of complementary, what's other complement methods, I think about how to address risk and safety when no test predicts AI going off track. So it's almost nearly impossible to predict every single risk out there. So I think this is where layers of safety come in. And this is where AI companies building for youth can think about age assurance and parental controls, and other safety tools to empower users and their loved ones for those edge cases that red teaming may miss.
Yeah, I agreed, and I think that the flexibility of red teaming as a tool, the ways in which it is something that's accessible to people, even if they're not within a platform, but to identify risks that they may then want to raise to the platform, makes it, I think, an especially important process to understand for a lot of folks who may be concerned about these issues but are outside of companies. Vaishnavi and Ali, I'm curious if either of you have responses to Ariel, I think she'd like to add to that question.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges that we see with red teaming pretty frequently is that, particularly when we're talking about youth safety and young people, it's really hard to red team products for children and teens because it requires you to deeply understand the behavioral patterns, signals, off-platform cues, pre-usage cues that you may not necessarily know about the developmental psychology of a child or a teen. And you can't really test these products on children and teens. Like, you can't actually have them be the red teamers. You can in some very specific, very well sandboxed, ways. And there are very good, I think, organizations doing this in a safe and effective way. But doing it at scale is incredibly challenging because of the nature of the subject population. So that makes red teaming, when it comes to youth safety, particularly challenging. What we've seen be helpful is partnering with great youth organizations, partnering with great parent organizations, educator groups across different markets, and then understanding the unique challenges that they might be facing. One of the reasons I'm so excited about the kind of work that Rithm Project and apgard are doing is that there's really so much work being done to introduce structure and frameworks into the process that can make the results of red teaming repeatable and testable across different markets. So when you have an evaluation framework or you have a set of protocols that you're repeatedly using in different contexts, you can then compare and understand and then truly build a product system, product-based decisions based off of that. And then I think the final piece is, red teaming to me is incomplete unless we move to the blue team aspect of it, which is what are those defenses that you're going to be building up that can proactively protect against this in the future, but not just this one specific type of harm that was identified, the sort of structural type of a harm or risk that was identified from the red teaming that can then keep you going for the long run. Now, these concepts, have long existed in cybersecurity, and we benefit from some of the insights from that industry. But when we kind of if we, for example, have worked with clients on doing red teaming processes and then standing up the blue team side, only to realize that it doesn't actually truly map to the nature of the harm of the red teaming that we uncovered in red teaming, and the amount of work that had to be done to really calibrate that was significant. So I'd say, like, if you're having a red teaming strategy, it should then very naturally, it has to kind of lead into, well, what is your blue teaming strategy to, really account for this in the future, and also to make sure that it's targeting the specific harms that were surfaced in the red teaming process.
Yeah. Plus one to all of that. I just named that if you need young people on your red team. You need people who are proximal to the lived experiences that and the lived realities of that will understand the lived context. And I'll just give the example of I remember one of my first projects in grad school was studying Second Life, this like simulated virtual world, right? And we were trying to study how kids were learning in science simulations. And I was walking in a classroom, and there was two kids that spent the entire 40-minute class period flushing the toilet. And so that's a prime example of what kids are actually going to be the ones that really understand the ways that they're going to game the system, break the system, right? And they're going to do it in 5 minutes or less. And they're going to do the strangest things in the system, and they're going to find ways to break it to short circuit any safeguards that they have. And so I think they need to be both part of the ways that you're going to test the parameters of your safety systems, and also be part of the ways that you can improve the security systems, the part of that blue team, other side of that too. So I think I'm excited by that, because that means inherently there needs to be some youth co-design as part of this new way of designing for youth safety.
I think that is such an important point, Ali, and I know that that the work you all are doing at Rithm is really helping to lay some of the groundwork for that youth co-design. I also think about groups like Design It For Us and the Young People's Alliance, who are helping to make sure that youth voices youth leadership is really present and heard in these conversations about AI safety for young people. I wanted to come around to our last question, which gets to Alison, gets to your work. So I want to talk about some of the different use cases that product teams might focus on for AI systems that are targeted at young users and their relative risks. Can you share a bit about your research on the specific risks of long thread length conversations, and what that means for the kinds of use cases product teams and other stakeholders might want to be cautious about?
Yeah, so part of what we do at the Rithm Project is we spend a lot of our time talking to young people. And what we were hearing from our young people was that many of them, almost all of them, were using AI in some capacity for social and relational purposes. Talking to AI, asking for advice about their relationships, ranting to it about their day in some form or another. And that was totally developmentally normal. It was like, well, where else am I going to go to for advice without judgment, or without someone, judging me for this weird question that I want to ask? And yet, when we probed a little bit further, we asked them a follow-up question of, who do you see using this technology potentially more than others? And there was a particular subset of folks that they seemed to observe using this more than most. And I remember one quote in particular. They were like, there's a particular group of young people that seem to be using this that are like the loners in their class, the ones that don't seem to have anybody to be talking to before class starts or during lunch, that seem to be talking to their chatbots. Now, there aren't quantitative data to back this up quite yet, and we're actually conducting a study right now to look at the relationships between young people's social biome and their AI use. But it might be interesting to look at the relationship between young people's social biome and their the levels of AI engagement. But we were also really interested in this idea of what is the relationship between long thread length conversations and the increased likelihood of harm spirals, especially given that what we've seen in the news right now, that there is a small but a high severity of young people who are using AI chatbots that then lead to really disastrous consequences, right? Sewell Seltzer and Adam Rain being some pretty high profile cases of young people who used AI chatbots that then led to their deaths. And so when we looked at AI harm spirals, which we also colloquially called AI rabbit holes, we were really trying to understand what led to these AI harm spirals. And when we looked at the user journey between this, we really started to observe that there were segmentations of this user journey. There was typically a gateway that led to this spiral. There was a recursive feedback loop between the user and the system that deepened the spiral. And then there was finally a point of no return. And between each of these segments, you can actually study what was happening with the user and what was happening with the system. What is the desired behavior of the system versus what was the actual behavior of the system? And if we can look at each of these three stages, we can actually decide, how do we detect what was the actual undesired behavior of the system? And then how do we mitigate that? And then how do we design and implement the actual desired behavior of that system? So I named this as just as a framework for how might companies start to look at the harm spirals that may happen in their organizations, within their products, right? And these harm spirals might be with suicidal ideation. It might happen with delusion and conspiratorial thinking. It might happen with increasing romantic or sexual spirals, right? We know those things can happen, particularly with minors and grooming and sexual exploitation. But let's just be clear, none of these things are desirable for anybody over 18 either, right? So even though we're talking about youth safety here, mitigating this for young people also means that you're hopefully mitigating these bad experiences for everybody else as well. But I talk about these rabbit holes or harm spiral frameworks really as a framework to be able to say, if were able to, for example, look at the gateway behaviors, what are some of the things that might lead to a gateway into a harm spiral? What are some of the, for example, gateway behaviors from a user or a system level gateway? Is it a design interface that might lead to a user entering into a spiral? Is it a system interaction? Is it a chat response that might lead to it? If you're able to observe what are the sorts of gateway interactions that dramatically increase the likelihood of a harm spiral, you can then mitigate against that, right? You could also then look at what are the combination of features, right? Are there account level features, right? Maybe it's a combination of a gateway signal plus an account level feature. Maybe there's account level features of maybe this account has had prior history of intimate interactions before, for example, or other kinds of objectionable content interactions before. So I say that all to say is that I offer more of a framework for entering into looking at these behaviors. And then finally, I would just say one final piece is I think we've had a lot of conversation about objectionable content detection. That's really important. I'm excited about the progress that we've made in detecting sexually suggestive content, violent content, hateful content. That's important. I think equally important and less spoken about is the loop and dependency enforcement behavior. Things like emotional mirroring, things like emotionally manipulative companionship enforcement, those kinds of behaviors that reinforce isolation, that prolong the chat length, whether it's within a session or increase the likelihood of returning to the conversation. We know those things reinforce social isolation, increase the likelihood of harm spirals, and overall erode young people, not just young people, but users in general, the likelihood of them increasing the dependency on AI chatbots. Those kinds of behaviors are writ large harmful to users. Regardless of whether or not they're attached to sexually suggestive or hate speech behaviors, we need equal efforts to detect and reduce those kinds of feedback loops as well.
I think that is such an important point, Alison, around the the ways that AI companions are showing up in relationship and how there may be things that aren't forms of content, but that are dynamics that we need to be very, very cautious about when it comes to assessing product risk. Vaishnavi and Ariel, curious if you all have any responses to what Alison has shared or to the original question.
Yeah, I just want to say I love the framework around harmful spirals. I think one of the challenges with I think to build detection, you need to know what you're looking for, essentially. And I love that you're starting to break down what are the gateways or signals to look out for. What I've have seen in detection at the moment is it's very like one size fits all, and catches a lot of like like how would I say it? I think there is a lot of like incidences where context is missing, and then it will flag and send users to 988. And I do appreciate that because of the sensitive nature of talk about self-harm or suicidal ideation, that there's overflagging, but it does miss the point of properly intervening when a user is opening up to a chat box. I think this technology can be beneficial to everyone. I think with over moderation, you can just shut down the conversation altogether. So I do think the industry can do a lot better with its moderation, something we're personally working on too. But it takes time, and I think access to data and analyzing these data is super rare occurrences. I think OpenAI even said that these situations are so rare, it's hard to analyze and generalize detection. But yeah, it's where I think the Rithm project and AI researchers play a big role in. But yeah, I just +1 that.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I'm really, proud of is that we were one of the first companies to put out an age-appropriate AI development framework in May of 2024. This was about a year and a half ago. And at the time, our understanding of the universe of interactions that models and users could have was so I hate to say it, sort of boring. It was like, it can help you with your math. It will help you with, coaching you for a test. And since then, that framework has had to go through so many iterations. And we've, it's a living, breathing framework that we use with our clients. And the work that researchers and co-designers and red teamers and evaluation frameworks folks, the work that they do to improve our understanding of the space has actively helped us improve that framework for platforms. And so when I think about some of the great work that Alison's talking about, I think, was it the last issue of our newsletter where we really broadcasted, because I remember when you shared the link with me at first, I was like, this is a great piece of research. And then I was like, everyone needs to nerd out on this with me, please. This is so great. I think it's really important that we take a step back and realize that what's being described here is truly social technology. It's very, very exciting as a developer, as a researcher, as a policy person to be building the safeguards around this. I think there are very few things that are as exciting in this space right now. So if we have, devs and PMs and engineers, researchers, data scientists who are listening to this, please come work on these issues with us, because this is, I think, some of the most interesting work that we can all do together. And I think even this collection of brains here is a really great, representation of the very many ways in which we are approaching this problem.
I love that call to action, Vaishnavi. I do think this is such exciting, such incredibly important work to be doing right now. I want to move to some of the questions that are starting to bubble up in chat, and I welcome those of you on the screen to ask more questions. So I'm going to start with one from Ian Levy, a tech industry member with a deep background in the intersection of tech and human rights. Ian says, I'd love to hear from the panelists about ways in which AI can help kids more effectively exercise their rights to freedom of expression, access to information, participation in political processes, and more, and how this should impact the design of youth safety policies and the design of systems.
I think this is a really important part of the equation. I'm particularly concerned about the way in which we are rapidly moving to restrict the use of AI by children in ways that are very blanket and very crude. Actually, I think someone in the chat, Patricia, who is just a fountain of knowledge in this space, pointed that out very correctly as well. This is a real opportunity for elevating the rights and agency of children and teens. We talk a lot about restricting them from these tools, restricting them from the products altogether. Even if that were the best answer, which I am not sure that it is, but even if that were the case, what is your plan for building up the scaffolding, the literacy, the technical and social competence to navigate this tool once you turn the, arbitrary age that you are going to turn when you're supposedly going to know how to use this? What changes when you turn 16? What changes when you turn 18? How are we building you up for that along the way? And I think, Ian, as a human rights expert, really brings this up very well. We need to be thinking about the fact that these are entire forms of technology permeating our systems, and reducing the access of children to these systems is an infringement upon their rights. The better option, and I will, put my signature on this, the better option is to design those tools in healthier, more inclusive ways. We're already seeing that children and teens are incredibly good at taking AI tools and turning them into conduits for their creativity. They're producing more and more interesting work. They're producing it faster than we ever could. That age-old adage of I can't believe kids today are so smart is just becoming exponentially more true as they get access to these tools. And so there's really good ways in which we can support them with this. I think a few issues ago in one of our choir newsletters, we also talked about the reality that, you know, we are living in an open source environment, which means a lot of these models are available as open source tools that can just live on your computer in these very, you know, arguably small sets of snippets of code, which means that if the answer is just to blanket ban or blanket block children from these technologies on the big platforms, they're just very easily going to be able to go to these more ephemeral platforms, you know, take an open source piece of technology and use it themselves. So that really isn't the answer. And so we need to be thinking about how can we do this in a way, how can we actually harness the power of this technology to amplify the rights and agency that children should and really ought to have across the tech ecosystem.
Yeah, I agree. I think if we ban these tools, children are just going to find another way to use them, and they'll likely be more harmful by going to underground sources. Oh, also on the note of adding benefits to young people's lives, I think like there's this big promise of personalized services, like personalized education tools. And I heard an anecdote about how the current school system that we see now, a lot of teachers just are overworked. They don't have the bandwidth to manage 30 plus children in a classroom, and they typically focus on the top 10% and that's bottom 10%, but there's this like 80% middle layer where a lot of students just float through the education system. So I think AI can have a big promise for young people in their personalized education.
Yeah. Plus one to every the points Ariel and Vaishnavi just made. I'll just add like 3 really brief points. Number one, it's not just young people that deserve safer experiences. We all deserve safer experiences. So by just saying we'll solve the safety problem by just banning kids off the app is actually a scapegoat problem. Like we actually all deserve safer experiences, and banning is not a solution. Number 2, young people never asked to be banned. If we ask young people what they actually want, they're not saying ban this. They're saying help us understand how to use these tools in ways that actually are in service of our thriving. Help us understand what safety looks like. Help us navigate these tech tools in ways that serve us and not erode our capacities, right? If you actually talk to a lot of young people, they're actually quite skeptical of technologies and quite skeptical of big tech companies. They feel very skeptical of the algorithm. And so we actually are doing them a disservice by assuming that they're just all in on these technologies. And we're doing them a disservice by not creating the space for them to make meaning around this. And so to Ariel's point is that they're actually really hungry for the space to learn and make meaning alongside each other. And something we say a lot at the Rithm Project is we don't tell kids what to think or what to do, because even if we did, it wouldn't work. I think we've learned from sex ed and from the DARE program that, you know, it doesn't really work when we try to tell kids what to do or what to think. But it does work when we will give them space to make meaning for themselves about what they want, right? And if we don't make that space, then they're left to flounder for themselves about what their moral compass is. And it also reinforces inequities, right? Because the kids that have resources to adults in their lives and the technology and the fluency for adults that model for them what good tech use looks like, or the conversations around how to use this tech effectively, are going to do so. And the kids that don't have access to the tech fluency are going to be left behind or left to flounder for themselves.
Thank you all so much. There's one more question I wanted to get to quickly, but we only have about 5 or 6 more minutes, so I might ask you all to give quick thoughts on this, and then we will move to close out this this panel. This has been so informative. It is so really, really an honor to get to hear from your all's experience on this really critical issue. The last question we have comes from Eric Davis, also an Integrity Institute member who has deep expertise around this issue. And the question is, in terms of mitigating risk for young people, are we simply hitting the limits for what's feasible right now? And I think I might add, apologies for this, Eric, a spin on that of, are there places where we're hitting those limits? Are there things that, limits to the tooling we have that are important to understand?
I actually really agree with this, that I do think there are certain limits. And this is just my personal opinion. I don't, I wouldn't say this is a universally held belief. So just looking at kind of Vice's own journey, we last year spent a lot of time with foundational models on red teaming and building guardrails and recommending, things that could be done better. And over the course of the last year and a half, have kind of migrated towards, well, we actually need to do more work closer to the end user. And that means working with the downstream applications that are building on top of these models rather than the models themselves. And I think there's still, of course, an incredible amount of great work that can be done with foundational models, whether it's, the next GPT-4 or 5 or whatever, or any of the others. But I actually think that the more meaningful work that I've seen and that we've really enjoyed doing especially over this last year, has been working with developers who are building on top of those models and producing the final product that their consumers are going to use. So that could look like an edtech platform that is building, a new tutoring AI companion. It could look like a new content creator site that's focusing on AI avatars and AI companions. In that regard, the work there, I think, is actually the fact that you are closer to your end user and that your end user is more clearly defined offers a much richer set of options for risk mitigation and harm detection. It offers more concrete parameters for red teaming, for building up your blue team in response. And I think your final solution can scale better for that particular user segment, as opposed to, when you're working with a foundational model that has millions and billions of user types to think about across the world in all these different contexts. I also think that we're hitting our limits in terms of what we can do with this very global North lens towards youth safety and red teaming, where we're essentially, thinking about the experiences of a very specific type of child with a specific socioeconomic, cultural, language, background that is using these tools. We're kind of, I do think we're hitting the limits of that, the usefulness of those insights when it comes to the global majority in the rest of the world. When we travel and talk to young people or to parents and educators and school districts in India or in Australia and Singapore, in the Middle East, we just see a very different type of use case, a very different type of youth experience, a very different type of youth pre-context that they're coming in with that our current systems just are not accounting for and are not building for. So I think we're reaching our limits in terms of our current frameworks and assumptions that we make when we are building these safety safeguards, but that we have a lot more we can do in terms of streamlining and kind of understanding who our user specifically is going to be in terms of which market are they coming from, what type of end user product are they actually going to be using, and so on.
Thank you so much. And I know we're almost out of time, but Ariel and Alison, I wanted to give you a quick moment for a few final thoughts on this question overall.
Yeah, overall, I agree with Vaishnavi's point on hitting the limits of current frameworks and tools. I think similar to what I was saying earlier, a lot of the tools are one size fits all. We have been thinking about this idea of personalized safety. What would that look like, especially as we switch from the social media town square to individual intimacy with AI tools. So yeah, I think we have a lot more potential to build better content moderation.
I'm having a trouble answering this question with a straight face. I think I so trust Vaishnavi and Ariel's expertise, and yet I find myself really wondering if this is really the limit. Maybe it's the limit for what's feasible given the dollars invested. And yet, when I look at the proportion of dollars invested in building these foundational models versus the dollars invested in safety, if we spent $1 or even 10 cents to every dollar spent on safety, I could imagine that we would be much more, we have not hit the limit for what we could be investing in mitigating risks. And I say that because I think as a researcher, I think about the universe of possible questions that we could be asking right now about what are all the things that we could be investigating? There are so many different ways that we could be asking questions around loop and dependency enforcement. We could be asking a myriad of questions about CSAM and the fact that these are social and relational interactions that we should be asking lots of questions about in the ways that this is showing up in early teens, late teens. We should be asking lots of questions about young people's mental health and the way that these interactions are reinforcing that. There are millions of questions we should be asking about the interactions between real life social connections and AI interactions, right? There's so many questions we can be asking. And so perhaps the answer is yes, the feasibility given the dollars invested now. And yet I think if we opened up the pot, I think there could be much more questions we could be asking.
Thank you so much, Alison. We have just a few minutes left in the hour, so I'm going to move to close. Uh, Speaking of investments, I wanted to say to those of you who are on this call, I'm going to drop a link in chat, and I would welcome you, if you find conversations like this helpful, to consider making a donation to support the work of the Integrity Institute. We are a organization with leading experts in trust and safety, working around both the kinds of issues we talked about here today, and a wide range of other issues protecting the social internet, helping to build open, honest public understanding about the realities of protecting the social internet. If you think this work is important, I know it has been incredibly impactful. Please consider supporting us. And the other thing I would like to ask is if you found this conversation interesting or valuable, or if you didn't, we have a quick survey that I'm also putting into chat, just to, I believe, I apologize. I think it put the wrong thing in my clipboard. There we are. Please fill out that quick survey. It should only take a minute or less to give us a sense of what you thought of this conversation. And with that, thank you so much, Vaishnavi, Ariel, and Alison. It has really been an honor to learn from you all today. And I know that we're going to continue having rich conversations, both closed door conversations for our members and more open public conversations like this around this very critical and rapidly evolving issue. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.